My name is Jonathan Steinberg, and I've just completed a book called Bismarck, A Life. And it was an extraordinary life. It was the life of a man who was almost exactly the opposite of the public image we have of him. He was never a soldier, but after a certain stage he always appeared in uniform. He never had real power. He never had a majority in the parliament. There was no Bismarckian party, or if there was one, it was very small. He never addressed mass crowds. He was not a great orator. But what was he? He was the most powerful man in the 19th century. And how did he become that? Well, he rose from relatively modest squire background, farming background, upper class, yes, but not with much money. But he was so smart and so brilliant that even as a 17-year-old, he impressed his college friends, one of whom went away and wrote a novel about him at the age of 18. What he was like at 18 was already remarkable. So I decided that what one needed to do to get this book right was to write a biography, but a biography which is not just about the person, Bismarck, but about the people who lived with Bismarck, who opposed him, and above all, the people who helped and observed him close up. I was interested in a general called von Roon, Albrecht von Roon, who first met Bismarck when he was 17. And Roon must have been so impressed with young Otto that he kept an eye on him. And when Prussia went into a crisis in 1858 about its army, Roon was convinced, and took 4 years to do it, he convinced King William I to hire this man, to make this man minister-president, a man who had a reputation for being completely intemperate, completely off the rails, wildly right-wing and impossible. Bismarck became, in effect, the surrogate son, I think, of William I. William I was 65, and Bismarck's entire career depends on this personal relationship between him and his king. And that gave me the idea that what one really needed to do was to think about the power of the human self. And I then began to consult very often the unused, long-published memoirs of people who knew him well. Hildegard von Spitzenberg, a very clever young society lady who moved into the house next door on the Wilhelmstrasse. They lived in 77 and the minister-president lived in 76. And she was in and out of the house all the time. And she always went back to her house and wrote her diary about what she'd seen. She very often said, I interviewed Bismarck, and she often used the English word because she was interested in how he worked. I looked at the correspondence of his friends, their diaries, in order to get a rounded picture, because what I was interested in was the power of this self. The reader has to realize that it was a kind of family drama. What Bismarck did was, in effect, to insert himself between the old king and his wife, the Queen Augusta, between the old king and the crown prince, the king's son, between the old king and his daughter-in-law, the Princess Royal Victoria. And he did that, I think, out of two insights. Insight number one was that the king really did not want to see Prussia become a liberal English-style monarchy. And that secondly, he, Bismarck, knew how to manipulate the king better than the king did himself. And from 1862 to 1888, they had constant rows. They were both exhausted. They both burst into tears. They wrote each other letters. Bismarck was always resigning, but the king always gave in. So you had the paradox that the most important figure in Europe, the man who transformed European history, had a slender lifeline to power. He was not a soldier. He did not have a party in parliament. He did not have a mass following outside. He had a public of one. And since the old man lived on and on and on, and always gave in to Bismarck when it came to the crunch, Bismarck got his way. And he got his way to set up a state which did not concede, even though there was universal suffrage, to the English model, which became a German semi-absolutist model, which Bismarck, when he died, bequeathed, so to speak, to his followers, to the Kaiser, and then ultimately to Hitler. So it's a story about a very, very remarkable human personality and what that personality achieved in 28 years in power.